Okay.
All right, now you're unmuted.
All right. This meeting is called to order. And Yango encourages all citizens to comment on any city business except land use applications. And this is not a dialogue platform. Comments shall be limited to 5 minutes. If you request additional accommodation or additional time. All right. Well, is there anybody online that would like to make a public comment? Going once, twice, 3 times. All right, we don't have any presentations or public hearings tonight. So the next on the agenda is the committee report. Do we have someone from the Economic Development Committee who would like to talk to us? Okay, moving right along. The good stuff's coming, don't worry. All right, housing grant. Walt, is that you? There you are, great.
Yes, I am here. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission and everyone who's in the audience. Just want to give you an update. I have a phone conversation tomorrow at 10 a.m. with Melissa, who's our DLCD rep, and she says she has good news for me concerning the funding of the housing grant. So as soon as I get that information, I will pass it along to the Angela, who can distribute it to the commission, and I'll make sure that the mayor and staff get it as well. So looks like we might be getting that project up and rolling.
All right. Well, would you describe what that housing grant is?
What we're looking at is actually 2 parts to this, and I'm really excited if we get the second part. The first part is to look at our development code, which we're kind of doing right now, and determine if there's any changes we could make to encourage housing. And so, do we have more infill? Do we look at lot sizes? What can we do to make sure that we can meet the housing needs for the community? The second part of that grant, though, and I think the most important one is the buildable lands inventory. I know that's going to bleed in a little bit to commercial and public lands, but this will give us a good snapshot of what's available. And when the sort of doors open for the city to proceed with an urban growth boundary amendment, we can do that with having a lot of background information done. So I think this will serve us well. Again, I'm hoping we get that. I'll find out tomorrow, and I'll pass on that information.
And that money would be used to pay high-powered consultants to do that for us, that being you, right?
Yeah. Oh, hey, I charge triple for being high-powered. No,
Okay.
seriously. Actually, we have to go through a formal contractual arrangement. There was no local match required, but I did note that, staff is going to help with like printing costs and meetings and whatnot. So we certainly have an in-kind contribution to the project.
All right. Thank you. All right. The next on the agenda is the technical assistance grant.
Okay, I just want to let you know that I submitted a technical assistance grant to look at our central business district overlay zone and all the various parts of our code that have to do with the city's downtown. That was submitted on time on October 2nd. So far, I haven't heard a word. So right now, no news is good news. And I believe at the end of the month, or the first part of November, they will be contacting various cities. So I'm just keeping my fingers crossed on this one. Again, what we're doing here would be very helpful on that project as well. So I'll let you know as soon as I know. How's that?
That's great. And how will that money be used?
Well, that money will be used. Basically, we will have a series of tasks. We will invite the downtown The Economic Development Committee will probably be our sounding board. Anyone who owns businesses or property downtown will certainly be invited as sort of a advisory committee. Also want to reach out to any sort of underserved communities as well. Those are one things that one of the items I had to work on with the application, just to make sure that we're helping everyone we can. Because let's face it, we don't have an industrial zone. We have an industrial zone, but we don't have production facilities, if you will. We don't have businesses on the land, but we do have a downtown, and that downtown is our basic economic engine for the community. So anything we can do to take steps forward, I think that'd be great.
All right, thank you. Fat, oil, and grease, and I guess this is a good time to review that language.
Well, I can review the material. I just want to really start out with a kind of my summary. These regulations I'm going to be discussing are not related to planning. In other words, we look at titles 10 and 11, and that's kind of where we're at. Jason did review these. He supported the material. And again, right now your role is basically to make a suggestion to the city council to go forward. My other comment is that I hope somewhere along the line the council would consider some sort of program to help reimburse the various businesses that may have to make some changes. In other words, take a little more proactive approach instead of just regulations. Let me kind of walk through this. Again, I'm not an expert on this matter, although I can understand the importance when it comes to taking care of waste and solids. I know when I worked in Dundee, the big issue they had was a lot of the wineries would dump their solids, and you would see this incredible algae bloom out at the sewage plants. So it's important that we kind of keep things as clean as possible given the circumstances. I started on the Oregon Planners Network, looking for some advice. A number of planners suggested we look at City of Milwaukee. They thought it was a pretty clean ordinance in terms of pretty straightforward, not a lot of details involved. And I thought that was a good way to start. I made some modifications to fit within the city. I also used the numbering system for the city of Yamhill. So if this is adopted, it would be the same numbering system. This is our city numbering. It's pretty straightforward. I have it attached to my staff report. The actual specific language, kind of walk through this. You know, it starts off with a purpose statement. This is an introductory provision. It makes it clear that regulations on fats, oils, and grease apply to all food service facilities, not just restaurants, but schools, maybe senior centers or whatever. Anytime that there is any sort of restaurant activity or food prep, these rules will apply. We have a set. Go ahead.
On that, is it possible that the thought of manufacturing came up? There may be somebody that, I don't know, churns butter or something.
Mm-hmm.
Should it apply to not just food service, but manufacturing?
Well, that's a very interesting point. Anytime you're doing manufacturing, generally there's some DEQ requirements to follow. I'm looking at this as kind of the low-hanging fruit to start off with. This is something that Jason has a lot of concerns with. I think we could take immediate action, and as we gain some experience, go out and see what else may need to be done. So I've kind of made that approach. That seemed to be pretty straightforward. And again, most of the recommendations that I saw said, see these rules because they're pretty simple and straightforward. And what I like about they're as fair as possible and provide reasonable ways for people to address the regulations.
Okay, good enough. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on, then we have definitions under section 30. Section 40 is the core of the requirement. Unless you're otherwise exempted, grease interceptors or traps are required for all food service facilities. They must be installed in new facilities and they must be comply with building regulations. Existing systems may be maintained, provided they operate properly. And however, they must be replaced if they're undersized, do not operate correctly, or kitchen modifications are planned. So in other words, the status quo is acceptable at this point. However, a business that does not have a grease trap may continue to operate provided they obtain an exemption. This exemption is limited to food service facilities that contribute little or no fats, oils, or grease to the system. The one thing that came in mind would be, say, maybe a coffee shop or a sandwich shop where you're not doing deep frying or grilling, and that might be an exemption. So basically, let me run down this thing again. All new uses, all food service facilities have to have these traps. All new facilities have to install them as part of their development. Existing traps or interceptors may be maintained and used as long as they're functioning properly. And those facilities that do not have a trap or an interceptor may seek an exemption to these requirements. So again, this is trying to be as fair as possible, but also another reason I kind of recommend if the city could develop a grant or other program to help pay for this, that would be fantastic.
Well,
Yeah.
Sean's got a question.
So, just out of curiosity, have the restaurants in town seen this at all or provided?
No, I'm starting off right from the get-go, and this is where I'm working through the planning commission. I think Jason, if anyone, would be carrying this forward to the city council because they're the ultimate arbitrator. Again, this is not a planning action, and we're just providing some advice. I would hope at that time folks are contacted, ask for their input. I'm just starting off with the basics and go from here.
Great, thank you. I had a question. Well, you talk about exemption, and then there's some language down here in D3 about, relative impact, and if it's low. Who makes these decisions? Who grants exemptions?
Okay, let me get to that point. I'm going to be going, I'm pretty close to that. So let me sort of continue on and I should be able to help out with that. Okay, so once installed, these have to be maintained. That's sort of pretty straightforward. If you're disposing anything from the traps, they have to be done properly. There's actually firms that do that. It has to be stored properly and removed. And that's, again, the next part. Usually you have to hire a waste grease service for this, and they work with them. The owner can work with them on storage, etc. Any spills must be cleaned up or disposed of properly. And let's see, use of chemicals and other additives. You can't use chemicals within the system because that creates issues downstream. The city has a right to inspect the facilities. There are certain enforcement provisions that allow the city to, make sure that these are operating, they're taken care of, but can also be installed. There's a section on best best management practices that provide recommendations. Now, the enforcement covers, let me see. Just one moment here. Okay, if you look under section 3.66040D, that's on the bottom of page 5 of the material. That's a situation that notes that if there is a pre-existing facility without a grease trap, they may apply for exemption. They make an application to the city. They have to show that they're producing minimal amount. It will be based on, and here's a provision, talks about based on comparison of a food service facility production as compared to other food facility productions. The SERB gives some guidelines on how that's done, the volume of the products, etc. So there's a little bit of analysis that must be done. Again, I think this is something that not so much city staff in terms of planning will review, but it's probably something Jason will follow up on. Ultimately, the burden of proof is on the owner. The owner has to show that based on my waste stream, I'm barely producing any grease. I don't need to have a grease trap. And let's see.
So, well, wait,
Yeah.
it says this application is made to the city.
That is correct.
The city can figure out its process within the staff. We don't really have to spell it out.
That is correct. Usually when you get to this ordinance level, the actual procedures are done administratively. So in other words, there could be forms to fill out, etc. This just provides the basis of doing it, that if you need an exemption, the burden of proof is on the owner of the facility to say, I can have an exemption because I don't contribute hardly anything to the waste stream. In other words, I just have a coffee shop and someone brings in the donuts and pastry, and that's the extent of my operation. Therefore, I don't need a grease trap. And there are guidelines on how that is measured, and that's within the code here. But again, the burden of proof is on the applicant. So
My question is, who's the arbiter?
it will probably be Jason would be my guess, because he's the only one that has, I think, any expertise on this.
But we don't have to decide that or specify it. It's just, it goes in
Correct.
the door, they hand it across the counter, and the answer comes back across the counter. And that person may say, there's a signature on it, oh, I'd like to talk to Jason, and then they may have a conversation. But that's as formal. We don't have to spell any of that out here.
No, I would recommend that you don't, because there's going to be a lot of nuances that you can't capture.
Okay.
So also, Jason is certainly within his power to contact the city engineer if there's some issues that need to be resolved. And DEQ is always a helpful agency in terms of making some of these determinations.
Thank you.
So I'll just wrap up by noting that this seems pretty clean, pretty straightforward. And the council did ask for some advice from the planning commission. I did send this material to Jason, and again, he looked at it and he thought it was pretty good. He could live with it. And I'll just kind of leave it at that, recognizing that this is out of our purview, but we certainly follow through with something for Jason and the city to work with.
So maybe just to put our fingerprint on it, I'd ask for a motion to recommend this language to the city council, just so they know that we've all nodded our heads at it.
Okay, and I would say recommend to the city council to consider this language.
All right.
Not the specific, but consider this as the model for them to proceed.
Consider this ordinance as a model for that oil and grease. Would someone like to make that motion?
I'll move that that oil and grease control language be recommended for consideration by the city council.
I'll second it.
Moore, aye.
Sean?
Freiberger, aye.
Aye.
Lynn, thank you.
Aye.
All right. So passed.
Oh,
All right, let's move on to the short-term rentals, all right, well,
I provide some information, I think, a couple of meetings ago, and I organized this again following the city formatting procedure in terms of numbering. If this were adopted by the city, it would likely follow this numbering system here. Again, I'd just like to note in summary comments before I get started, that these are not Title 10 or 11 issues, that we're following up on direction from the city council. And I think it's important that the council spends some time on this, because this is a tax administration issue. So I'm going to say I don't have a lot of expertise in this matter, but I can read code and follow through, if you will, whether or not the thing makes sense. The one I worked in originally was, I think, far too complex, and I think also very much tied into more of a tourist area, where we're looking at something a little more simpler to work with here. Bear in mind that this is really a transient tax, and so it applies not only to short-term rentals, but also hotels, motels, someone renting out cottages on a short-term basis. So this does not apply to someone who's renting an apartment, lives here in town, or someone renting a house. But for those short-term rentals or transient rentals, these regulations apply. So if the city ever got a hotel, those rooms would be subject to these requirements. So there's one benefit with that. Okay, let me go through this briefly. And again, I'm not an expert on these matters on taxing. And your comment on how is this processed was really an interesting question when it came to the FOG material. A lot of this is very general, and I think the details will need to be handled by staff on a staff level, between folks in finance and over the counter, that sort of thing. So, okay, here we go. It starts off with definitions, pretty straightforward. There's a tax imposed on transient operations at 7% of the fee. So if you charge someone $100 to stay at your house, 7% of that, or $7, would be going to the city. So this is a tax measure, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. The tax will be collected by the tax collector. And when I read that, I'm going, are we going to have some going around with like a little notebook and checking in on everyone? Well, they kind of do that in Newport. That's how they built their new city hall several years ago. But no, this is something that whoever operates the hotel, motel, short-term rental, Airbnb would actually take care of the documentation and pay the necessary fee to the city. So tax collector, you can have a neutral person do it, but tax collector merely means the person who really operates things. If you have a short-term rental, you have to be part of a platform like Airbnb. So in other words, you just can't go out there and rent your house. There has to be some sort of connection so that they know you are operating a short-term rental. And this is pretty common. Who's ever operating or owns is liable for the tax, pretty straightforward. There are exemptions to this tax, and that goes for shelters, clinics, hospitals, long-term care facilities, nonprofit camps, et cetera, and also apartments and housing rentals.
Let me stop you there. Can we back up to 040?
Sure.
I'm not sure I heard you say what I read here. For a hosting platform, for short-term rentals, to
Right.
collect a booking fee, the rental must be registered with the city. What I heard you say is that a person would have to, a provider would have to be registered with a platform. I'm not sure that's what you meant to say.
Well, often there are people who don't necessarily live in town, they own the buildings.
Yeah.
And so they could own homes all over the state. And so they have to go through the Airbnb to be sure, because they have to register the home here. But the connection has to be made through the Airbnb, that we're not just looking at someone who lives here and renting out occasionally, but really outside operators, if you will. I mean, it's practically run like a hotel. And so this captures that outside operator, if you will. So everyone has to be above board on this one. You just can't have it on the side. It has to be registered, and there has to be a connection that you can make that connection through, say, Airbnb.
Okay.
Okay.
I read here, for a hosting platform to be used, the rental must be registered with the city, meaning you can't just go to the platform and just operate with them.
Right.
And so I get that part, so that it connects it.
Right.
What I'm asking is, if I'm a provider here in town, I own a building, a house, and I want to be a short-term rental, I don't have to sign up with Airbnb. I just have to register with the city, and I'll do my own marketing and my own collecting and my own tax payment. True?
Correct. But
Okay.
this is for a hosting platform.
Right. If
Right.
you're going to use a hosting platform, you have to be registered with the city.
Right. Registered. Exactly.
Then you bring up another point. Say I don't, because say I'm a landlord that may be getting into trouble because I'm not maintaining a good connection with my property because I live too far away.
Mm-hmm.
Being a responsible provider, we had talked about having a manager or someone within a certain radius of the property.
And that's where I made a significant shift between looking at a sort of coastal situation where you have a high tourist trade, and something that's a little bit more here where I don't think you have that level of tourist trade. You know, I mean, for example, in Manzanita, they are constantly fighting over short-term rentals because they have neighborhoods where they don't know their neighbors because they're all rented out. And so that has caused a lot of grief in that community. So one thing to look at is do you think we're going to have that level of interest here? Maybe, maybe not, but I didn't want to start ratcheting up the requirements if it's pretty straightforward. Let's face it, if your place you're renting is really crummy, people are going to comment about it. Other folks are going to find out, and you're not going to be in business very long. I'd kind of look at the market taking some of this. And also, as owner, you're responsible for your property anyway.
Okay, I can see not having that. We just did talk about it. You were also addressing something of, they get so many of them in a neighborhood that some municipalities have been limiting how many can be within a certain distance of each other. And again, you're saying let's not worry about that right now.
No, I don't think that's an issue right now. I think if we can get the program off the ground, go through a little bit, and if we see, remember, everyone has to register once a year. So it's not as if like you registered once and you walk away. You have to re-register. And so at that juncture, if the city is seeing lots of people wanting Airbnb accommodations, we could start thinking of separation or limiting the numbers. So there's certain ways to do it. I do concur with you that the last thing you want is a high concentration of Airbnbs or short-term rentals within a neighborhood. It really kind of breaks down the community connections, if you will. So my whole point is that I think at this juncture, probably keep it pretty simple and straightforward. And then as we gain knowledge, we can go ahead and make that change to look at separation. Some cities require like 250 feet, some 300 feet. I don't think that's out of line. Yamhill is a fairly decent sized community in terms of area. So,
I can see that, getting this off the ground.
yeah,
It just happens to be that two people want to do this within 200 feet of each other. We have a 300-foot radius and there are only two people in town doing it.
exactly.
That's probably not, that would be overregulation, I would think.
Right. And so if we decide to make changes down the road, for example, on distance, it's not that hard to simply grandfather the other folks in and say all those previous ones are welcome to maintain their license going forward. So there's ways to make sure that there's some elemental fairness in this.
Okay, thank you.
At what
You're good.
point, John, at what point does it become like a long-term rental instead of a short-term? Is it like 30 days or 2 weeks, or I'm just curious about?
Well, you have under definitions a short-term rental. It says generally, in fact, it doesn't give a time limit. Okay, occupant, any individual who exercises occupancy for a period of 30 consecutive calendar days or less, and that's considered an occupant. And the right to use possession, occupancy of any space in transient lodging for dwelling, lodging, or sleeping for less than 30 days. So there's an inferred limitation that you're looking at short term, generally under 30 days. And again, if you're looking at like $200 or $300 a night for a real nice house, that can add up to a lot of money. I'm not sure a lot of folks, even if they want to visit wine country, are going to be spending that much. It's just kind of looking at some market forces here. But yeah, the whole idea is you rent it out for a week maybe, and then they move on, and then maybe you rent it out for another week. So that's it. Pretty straightforward.
Do you want to move forward through the code anymore?
Sure. Okay. And then there's anyone who has one of these hotel, short-term rental, Airbnb, whatever you want to call it, they have to register. We have then on the top of the second page of the memo, we have administrative provisions. Basically, you got to submit the right forms, provide the information. And again, Ken, going back to the last meeting, the city will take care of the details in terms of those forms. They don't have to be spelled out at this juncture. If you don't pay the bill, there can be penalties and interest if tax fees are not paid. We have a provision on deficiencies. In other words, let's say you're not completely honest with what you owe the city. there is a right for an audit for your books to make sure you're paying the correct fees. And so that's one thing. And if the audit shows that you're owed a refund, then the city has to give you the refund. If the audit shows that you owe more money, then you as the operator need to pay the extra fees. There is now saying that under the next item, the audit can be challenged by the property owner. So in other words, it's not just the city coming in and conducting an audit. The property owner also has a right to review the audit and have contrary results, if you will. City, again, this is more enforcement, can bring legal action for collections. City has a right to lien property, and operators may request refunds for overpayments. And this could include getting credit for the next month, if you will. Now, this is kind of an interesting situation based on the way the state law reads. These hotel taxes are designed to, if you will, promote tourism. So 70% of the fees that come to the city must be used for tourism promotion. Now, this can be anything. In fact, you know, if we ever redo the softball fields and have tournaments, you can promote that. If you have festivals downtown, that can be promoted. If you want to have a general promoting of the region, and we have Airbnbs for visitors to wine country, that's part of it. 30%, though, the remaining can be used for city services. So again, this is not necessarily a tax as a cash cow, but it's the idea to promote the tourism, to bring people in who will then be going downtown to a restaurant, who may do shopping here, who may enjoy the area, and it may promote people to bring businesses into town. So there's an economic development component in this material. Everything that's here can be appealed to the city council. And then finally, we have a session that ends with penalties. Now, I think we already discussed this. There is no separation requirements in this material, and it may not be an issue, but as discussed, you may want to consider it in the future. Again, the purpose would be to avoid having a concentration, if you will, on a particular neighborhood. So with that, again, as I stated at the beginning, this is outside of our purview a bit, but I think it's a reasonable way of doing it. It mirrors what Carleton has, and it's something I think is doable for the city to manage. And one of the things I would also recommend that if the council decides to adopt this, send a few folks over to the city of Carleton and see how they process it. Nothing like stealing their forms. I mean, that works out, and it, you know, you already have a ready built system in place that can be worked with. And then as we gain experience, we can make changes as we see fit.
Well, that's great. So, Lynn, do you have any questions?
No.
All right, John. Okay, I'm good. I think we'll just go with a motion to recommend this language of this ordinance, this draft ordinance, to the city council. So, who would like to make that motion?
I move to recommend this language for the city council, taking care of this language.
Second. All right, let's vote. John?
Hopkins, aye.
Moore, aye. Riley Gray.
Carl,
Thank you. All right, we'll gavel that one as a one over the bridge. So next is what you're all here for. Review of Title 10. So we, I wanted to, Walt suggested that we not go through, he intimated that it might not be the best thing to slog through the definitions tonight, because he said we need up to 12 more definitions per page. So I think it's not in shape for us to really look at yet. Well, are you going to bring something back to us with a whole new set of definitions?
I think that might be the easiest. Otherwise, we're going to be sort of looking at each one and trying to put the verbiage together. It might be a little bit better. I also suggested, again, I'm working on a project in Coos Bay right now where we're doing the same thing. We started on definitions and sort of the introductory provisions. And the planner there said, let's take a time out. Let's go back to the definitions at the end when we make sure everything matches up. Because we only got about halfway through and just said, this is just a little bit overwhelming at this point. I think what I can do, and I think I mentioned I could just take notes, comments, make sure things line up, and then at the end come back with a complete section on definitions that you could look at all the language at one time.
Right. Apologies to those of you that were prepared to go through every word, but I think we'll wait. Okay? But we will. Don't. Oh, we're gonna do, so let's see. We're gonna get to, we're gonna do preamble 10.4, and we're gonna do 10.12 tonight. So, I don't know how you want to handle this. Well, I had a few questions on the preamble. Do you want to give us an intro, or shall we start right in?
Well, I'll go through my notes. The preamble is basically your introduction to the purpose of Title 10. The one thing this doesn't have is a name. In other words, usually you would put Title 10 shall henceforth be known as the Yamhill Development Code. I think we've been calling it that, but I think it would be important to put a name to this particular section. The other thing that I saw missing was a purpose statement. You usually put in something that says the purpose of this development code is to implement the comprehensive plan. Let's see, like enforce public health, safety, and welfare. There's certain things you just put in there. It's kind of boilerplate, but it does lay out why you have this document. In fact, you can even see legislation on the state level where they would put the intent of the House of Representatives or the legislature is as follows, even though it's not law per se, but it does show intent and purpose.
What would the title be of chapter 10 again then?
What's that?
What would the title be for chapter 10?
I would call this the Yamhill Development Code.
All right.
Yeah,
And
just
what would the title for chapter 11 be?
it would probably be and that brings up another point that you may want to consider. You could call that the Yamhill Land Division Code.
Okay. Just want to make sure we had titles that.
Right. One of the things you may want to think about is to have a combined zoning code and land division code. So we could put it, combine Title 10 and 11 together. That's maybe down the road to think about, but just kind of put that in the back of your mind.
So we've got land development code and land division code,
Right.
10 and 11. All right, and those are the codes that we concern ourselves with.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. After purpose, we should probably have something in there about administration. In other words, who's responsible for operating the code? Generally, it's your city manager or designee. And it sort of gives authorization for the city to appoint someone as a planner. I mean, it just lays it out who's responsible for what. And that was kind of missing through this. So that's one thing that I think we need to put in there. You have everything consistent with regulations, which is pretty straightforward. Another thing I like to see is language to the effect that this code does not enforce deed restrictions and covenants. Those are private contractual matters. The city is not a party to that. So when someone comes up to City Hall and says they were supposed to paint their house beige and they're painting it blue, and that's what the deed restrictions say, we are not party to that sort of thing. Because again, we're not legally binding to that. I also think we should probably put in something here about fees. Fees are passed by the council by usually resolution, and that fees need to be paid as part of the process. Now, those are just kind of simple, straightforward things. Elsewhere within this code, there's severability sections and violations and whatnot. But I think those simple things to add will probably, lay out the preamble a little bit better. That's my thought.
That sounds great. So we're gonna give our suggestions to you. You have your own, and you're gonna come back with a modified version.
I would like to do that if you don't mind. In other words, next month I could come back with the changes we discussed tonight. Would that work for you?
Yeah, I have a few questions. It seems like in the the chapters, listing of chapters is accurate, but in 10.4.010, it doesn't reflect these chapters. In other words, the chapters got expanded, but this preamble did not, because we're missing light industrial and employment industrial. And so that means there's 7 zones.
Right.
So we should change the preamble just to reflect that.
Yes. And the other thing too is that I'm glad you brought that up, because we have a public facilities overlay zone, yet we don't have any provisions for public facility overlay.
And then, okay, so is that blank? I mean, as we go through here, where is, I thought that was in there, public facility facility zone is 10.36, and what's it say there? Nothing?
Yeah, you have a separate overlay. Let me just get to my codes and
Well, there is a chapter on it. I guess I'm not hearing what you're saying.
What's missing?
there is a public facility zone, but there is no public facility overlay zone. In other words, we need to make a decision. Did you want one or both? Or either or neither?
Oh, okay.
Because I think the school is zoned R1 or R2, but there's a public facility overlay zone on it.
So we don't have one, but it's not a bad thing to have if we need it. I mean, would we think about creating one? We don't need both.
I would think that to keep it clear, you would want to have a public facilities zone. Because let's look at it this way. If you want to allow schools in a residential zone, specifically state schools are allowed or conditionally permitted, whatever, to have an overlay, I think it just complicates matters, because then you would have to get a zone change approval to go ahead and establish the overlay. Then you have to go through the process of getting built whatever you want to get built. So I think if there's no need for the overlay, everything else would be grandfathered. Something to think about. This is a little tricky right now, but I never found any language on the overlay zone.
Okay, so do we, to make the preamble make sense, we would just cross out that B1.
I would think so, and I think under the PF zone, which we have to put in there, to note that the PF zone will also apply to areas previously subject to the overlay zone. In other words, somehow tie it back together.
So that means in addition to the 5 zones, I mentioned 2 more,
Right,
industrial and employment, now we're adding public facility zone needs
Right.
to this preamble.
correct.
Okay. And then along the same line, so I'll let you make a note of that. So it's 8, we have 8 zones.
Well, actually, you're missing something else. You're also missing the RM zone too.
And that's not in the list of chapter, oh, up there, RM, the multifamily, you mean?
Yep,
You're right. So that would go just between R3 and LRC up here, so it'd be
Right.
like 3.5. All right,
yeah, basically the notation would be to make sure we have all the zones in there. And if you also notice, the central business district overlay zone is not noted.
missing.
We have to add that as well. So basically make sure everything is up to date.
So we've got 9 zones now, and we still have 3 overlay zones because we scratched the PFO, but the preamble does not mention the city business district overlay, so
Right, so we do have to add that.
we'll still have 3 overlay zones.
That is correct.
Okay, and you've got all that down and you can straighten all that
Yes,
out.
yes, I do.
So, for just my clarity, so I can learn, what's the difference between the zone versus the overlay zone?
For example, you have a C3 zone, which is your commercial zone,
Right?
but you have an overlay that includes the vast majority of the C3 zone, but not every piece.
Heard of it.
That has a separate set of regulations
Okay,
overlay the C3
so
zone.
it's a refinement for that.
Exactly. So
That makes
C3 gets into design requirements when you put the overlay on it. Whereas the,
This town is this big and our.
yeah, exactly. Whereas the Shell station at the edge of town is just C3 and they don't have those design requirements.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, that's all I had on the preamble. Anything else? Okay, so let's move on. Past definitions, all the way to single family on page 257.
Okay. One thing I'm going to suggest is what I call a sort of zoning preamble. And in this notes how the zones are structured, what is allowed in every zone. For example, right-of-way improvements, putting down power lines, electrical grid, whatever. I mean, allowed in all zones. And also includes a section on things that you absolutely prohibit in all zones. For example, a livestock slaughterhouse. You probably don't want that in this community. Just a thought. So again, you would just kind of have a short list of things that there's no way in heck you're going to allow these. So this sort of organizes it. I have some ideas that I've worked with before that I think might be simple. If you'd like, I'd be happy to just kind of put 1 or 2 pages together and bring that back with the R1 zone changes, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. Right now we have We have twice in C on under 10, 12, 20 use. In C and D1, we have no goats and no pigs.
Okay, right. I did note that. So, yeah, again, there are certain things, for example, I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, can I bury my parents on my property? And the answer is no. So I'll just kind of just say things like that there's nothing like putting it right up front.
All right.
With regard, now, would you want me to continue with my comments or what? What works for you?
Well, you've got a lot of ideas on what this needs.
Yeah,
And you don't have to tell us these ahead of time. If you want to just bring us back the finished product, why should we wallow around in something? You'd have to explain to us why it's wrong or why you're going to correct it. Just correct it, and then we'll relook at it. So how does that sound?
that sounds perfect because I have a lot of thoughts on how this is structured.
Yeah.
And also the role of the commission and staff, and also what you want to allow with special requirements and conditional use.
Wow.
I would be very grateful if I can go ahead and just say, here it is, here's what you have, here's what I think might be appropriate. If you'd like me to do that, I would really enjoy doing that because frankly, it's better to look at something we're both looking at.
Yeah.
Opposed to guess what I'm thinking or what you're thinking.
Well, I think, but let us give us our 2 cents to you, so you can.
Sure.
You already have your $14 million. Just take our 2 cents and add it in. All right.
Okay.
So I just had a question on. We're still on 10, 12, 20, number 7, swimming pools
Yeah.
built below grade are permitted. It doesn't say anything about above grade. I know
Above
they
grade.
probably aren't in the code, but maybe we should spell that out.
Yeah. I made that same note.
Okay,
Instead of just saying swimming pools below grade, just say, oh, swimming pools below grade need to
Need a
get a
permit.
building permit. They
But
do
above
need to
ground
get a
don't.
building permit. Yes,
You might just mention that above ground don't need a permit.
and I got you there.
Okay. Now, the things that are conditional are boat, camper, trailer, and equipment storage area on lot. That's pretty vague. Do they mean like you're gonna rent out the space, or, hey, you can't store your camper or boat there without a conditional use?
That's what I see, and I think we have other provisions in the code that do allow parking of RVs. In fact, we had that whole thing, I think about 2 years ago, we started off looking at sort of changes. I don't think the planning commission wants to get involved with the conditional use, telling someone they can't park their trailer.
Right.
Just a guess, but I think, A, you have other things to do, and B, that's not so, I mean, I understand it's important for people, but that's not something you bring to a public forum.
But however, I do remember some problems with setbacks, and there were RV storage 6 inches from the fence or something, and that was a problem, right? But that's already handled somewhere else in the code.
That is correct. Basically, you get them behind in the backyard if you can, or under the carport or in the garage, or what most people do is just, except for like a boat, you park it on the driveway. So yes, there's ways to look at this, but a conditional use, I think, is overkill.
Yeah, but we do already have regulation about
Yes.
a huge camper, a huge motorhome right next to the fence. That it kind of can be a overwhelming presence to the neighbor. We already have addressed that, haven't we, in other code?
Yes, we have.
Yeah, okay, so I'll let that go and you figure out what to do with it.
So before I had something on 12020D1. So it mentions hobby shop or summer house, greenhouse, hothouse. Do we have any size restrictions that we need to suggest? I don't know. When I previous places I've lived, there was like a 200 square foot shop limit if I built an outbuilding, but I'm not seeing that in here.
Well, let's see. Further on in the code, we have provision on 1072 for 10.72
Oh, okay.
accessory structures. Usually what you're doing at this point is to alert a property owner that this is allowed, but there's other stuff down the road that you may have to consider.
Okay.
So we do have that connection. Again, my look is I'd like to change it a little bit differently so we can get that information right up front to the public.
Okay.
Okay, do you have anything else on this section, R1? Lynn, anything?
Nope, I'm good.
I think we've come to the end of this section, Walt, unless you have something you want to wrap it up with.
No, I think I'm going to just stick my neck out a bit on this one in terms of how I think it should be organized for the benefit not only of the public, but also the ease of staff and the commission to administer. So let me give it a shot, and we can go back to the drawing board next month, but I will have the preamble done and I will have this zone done as well as one other little piece. And if that works for you, that would really save us a lot of time.
Great, so you'll get that to us maybe a week or so before our meeting, and we'll be able to.
Absolutely.
And so we're not going to go on ahead with the next section yet.
No, let
Right.
us look, what you might want to do is just be prepared to do the next section. Look at this one, then we can go, or maybe be prepared to go to the next two sections. How's that?
Okay, so I'll have my 2 cents. We'll each have our 2 cents of little question marks that will get you ready to do the big reform on the next, let's just specify it right now,
R2 and R3.
R2 and R3.
Right.
Okay,
All right.
great, this is working great.
You want to just go through this whole chapter, I assume? Because I had questions about some of the stuff down below that I looked at, others chapters, but when you get to that.
I think, yeah, oh, you read the whole thing, huh?
Parts of it that I was interested in. I
Okay.
delved into it.
Well, we'll get to it, but
Okay,
it's gonna take a while.
yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Totally understand.
Good for you. All right, I'm looking at the agenda here, and I see information and announcements and next meeting info. So let's tackle that right now, next meeting. What would it normally be, Kenji?
Pull up my calendar.
Go again?
I have to pull up my calendar.
Oh, okay.
On my desk, I have it written on, so
It'll be November
Monday?
20. Does that sound right?
Maybe the second week?
20th of November? Is that what you said, Walt?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep, that's where I have it. Yep. Sound good to you, Lynn? You gonna be in the country?
Yeah,
All
I'll be
right.
there.
Okay. Any other information or announcements? Somebody stop me, I'm gonna gavel this over. You know, all right, we're done.
Good evening, folks.
We did good.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.